So, how good are you at trusting in God's will? Can you truthfully say, "Your will be done, Lord, not mine"? That's the difference, right? We want to say, "Yes, I want what God wants." And then it's like, unless it's not quite what I want, right? Sometimes we might be too afraid to pray for God's will because what if it's not what we want? And even worse than that, what if it's opposite of what we want? What if we have to suffer for a little while? What if things are really bad in our minds, even though that is what God wants? Are you able, are you brave enough to pray, "Lord, not my will, but yours be done"? Today in our story, we're going to see that one of David's sons betrays him and he doesn't know God's will. And he says it outright. He says, "I don't know what God's will is in this situation. And so I'm not going to act and I'm going to trust God. And if that means that I never get to go back to the city that I built, if it means that I have a bad relationship with my son, if it means that I die, if it means that my all of the people that used to love me hate me, all of those things, his reputation, his relationships, his kingdom, his home, if all of it is taken away from him, then if that's the Lord's will, then David says he's willing to accept that." And as I read all of those things, I thought, would I be able to do that? Would I be able, facing all of the things that David was facing, to say, "Lord, this is what I want. I know that you can do it, but if you choose not to rescue me from this situation, not to reconcile these things for me, and if everything ends up falling apart and not going the way I want it to, it's okay because I trust you. I accept whatever you give to me in this situation." And I don't know. I hope I would. I really hope I would. But this is hard, right? And so if we're facing these types of situations, then looking at this story that David, all of the things that David goes through, and he's still able to say, "Lord, not my will, but yours," then how much more can we do that in our situations? Most likely we're not facing all of those types of things. Maybe some people do, but the majority of us will never face all of those types of situations. And David is able to say, "Not my will, but yours, Lord." And so let's go through what happened to David. And then at the end of this lesson, we're going to talk about what the Bible says about submitting to God's will and how he can be trusted, and maybe get a little encouragement for us to be able to do this in our own lives. So every week for the past several weeks, we've been going through a story that began with David's son Amnon falling in love with his half-sister, David's daughter, by another mother, Tamar. And he cooked up a scheme to sleep with her. And when she didn't consent, he raped her. And then he refused to take responsibility for her as his wife and cast her aside. This upset Absalom, her full brother, and somebody told David. David did nothing about it. And so after 2 years, Absalom couldn't take it anymore. He killed Amnon for raping his sister. And then he fled to his grandfather's kingdom in Jeshurun. And David let him stay there for 3 years. Finally, his nephew convinced him to let Absalom come back home, but David would not speak to him. He's like, "Fine, he can come home, but he has to stay in his own house. He's not coming over here. I don't want to see his face." Well, after 2 years of that, Absalom's like, "I can't deal with this anymore. I want to see my dad. I don't know what he brought me back out of exile for if he wasn't going to welcome me back into the family. And so if he chooses to kill me when I see him, fine. But I can't take this anymore. I need reconciliation. I need closure in this matter." And so he does meet with his dad, and that's where we left off last week, seemingly as though these two have reconciled. All it says at the end of chapter 14 is that David kissed Absalom, and then it ends. And so we assume that they have reconciled. And then chapter 15, the lesson today, begins by saying that after this, Absalom seems like he takes full advantage of his new royal status, and he takes a chariot and some horses and some men. And then every morning he goes and sits at the city gate and intercepts people as they are on their way to the king. And all of these people are coming to the king with some sort of claim, something that they're wanting the king to do something about. And when Absalom sees them, he says, "Hey, what are you doing? Where are you from? What's going on?" And they begin to tell him what they have come to see the king for. And he is such a politician. If anyone ever does this to you, run away, because they have an ulterior motive. Because what he does is he says, "Oh, I really hate that for you. And the king doesn't have anyone designated to hear your case. I really hate that. If I were in charge, I would definitely fix that for you, because I completely agree that is a problem. And I sure wish I could do something about that for you. I would if I were the one in charge." And so obviously this is implying that David has no intention of doing anything to help this person. And if Absalom was the king, he would. And he does this every time that anyone comes to him. Well, after 4 years, he's seen, tons of people from all the different tribes, and he decides it's time to make his move. So he goes to his dad and he says, "Hey, when I was exiled in Jeshurun, I made a vow that I would make some sacrifices to the Lord and worship him in Hebron. So can I go to Hebron and do that?" David says, "Sure, that's fine." Well, Hebron is where Absalom was born, because remember, David was the king of Hebron, or the king of Judah in Hebron, before he was the king of all of Israel, ruling in Jerusalem. And so this is where Absalom was born, and probably spent a little bit of his childhood. And it may be, since the temple hasn't been built yet, where he's accustomed to making sacrifices. And so he goes there and he takes 200 men with him from Jerusalem. And basically just to have a big feast with him, because when you make sacrifices, then you eat those animals. And so he's like, "I want all of you guys to come." Meanwhile, he sends spies out to all of the tribes to tell the people in the tribes, "Hey, when Absalom blows his trumpet, then we want you to announce that he is the king of Hebron." Well, providing that David was the king of Hebron first, before he was the king of all of Israel, the implication is clear that he is pursuing the entire kingdom to take it away from his father. Well, so the spies go out to do this, and meanwhile, the people began to gather to Absalom there in Hebron, but the 200 people that he brought with him don't know anything about this plan. They think they're just there to, have this feast with him. They have no idea that he is planning to overtake David's kingdom. And presumably the reason that he brought these people specifically from Jerusalem in the first place is because they were probably important men that he wanted to get away from his father, so that when the revolt happened, they would already, be with him. And he's hoping that they wouldn't take the bold move to leave him and go to David. And so they would just kind of be on his side just because they're there. And meanwhile, he also calls Ahithophel to him, and this is one of David's advisors, and he's also Bathsheba's grandfather. So we don't know if, the connection to Bathsheba is for some reason why he decides to betray David, but he's decided to go and be with Absalom. And so then David gets word that the people are gathering around Absalom and they like him and that he wants to overthrow him. And so that there is not a fight in the capital city, in the city that David built, it's named after him. They call it the city of David. And so that his city isn't destroyed by battle, he decides to flee. And he takes with him his servants and all of his household except for 10 concubines who he leaves behind to take care of the household while he's gone. He's obviously hoping that he'll eventually get to come back home. And then when he reaches the outskirts of the city, he stops as he watches the foreign mercenaries that have been with him pass by him. And it says that these people are, let me look at their exact names because these are not familiar people. The Cherethites and the Pelethites, they think that these are people from Crete and Philistia. So these are mercenary soldiers that have come from other foreign nations to be with David. And then 600 Gittites, which are the men from Gath that have been with David since he left Gath. Remember, he had gone to Gath to escape Saul because Saul was pursuing him, trying to kill him. And so he stayed in the Philistine city of Gath until Saul died. And then these 600 men followed him from there. But now David's in exile again, and it's in a foreign place to them, and he has no idea where he's going to end up. He has no home. And so he looks at Attiah, the leader of the Gittites, and he says, hey, I don't even know where I'm going. I have no home right now. And you do have a home back in Gath. And so you should go back to your home and your king, because I'm not a king anymore and I have nowhere to go and I have nowhere for you to be. And Attiah says, no, we're completely dedicated to you. We don't have a king anymore or a country. You're our king and we'll follow you wherever you go. We are loyal to you and your God, not our king or our country. And so David says, okay, well then, I would love for you to come with me. And so they cross over the brook Kidron, which is the stream that is between Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives. And at this time, the two priests, Abiathar and Zadok, they come to see David with the Levites and the Ark of the Covenant. And when David sees the ark, he says, no, it doesn't belong with me. I made a tent for it there in Jerusalem. That's where it belongs. This is God's city, and his spirit hovers over the mercy seat. And this is where it belongs, is in the city of Jerusalem, not with me. God willing, I will be able to come back and I will be able to be, see the ark again and be in the dwelling place of the Lord there in that tent that I have made for it. But I do not want y'all to be here. And then he turns to Zadok and he says, aren't you a prophet? That's a messenger, right? Someone that, tells me the messages from God, or God the messages from me. And you can also, as a messenger, tell me messages from, the other people and the things that are going around. So what I want you to do is I want you to go back with the ark, put it back in the tent that I made for it. And then you can send me messages by way of your two sons. Each Abiathar and Zadok both had a son. And he said, since you are a prophet, you can send me messages through your sons. If there's anything I need to know, I want you to go back to Jerusalem. So they say, okay, we'll go back to Jerusalem. And meanwhile, David begins to ascend the Mount of Olives. And it says that he and all of the people with him were barefoot and crying, and their heads were covered in mourning for all of this that is happening to them as they're ascending up Mount of Olives. And then David is told that Ahithophel has betrayed him and he is now with Absalom. And as soon as he hears that, he prays to God immediately and he says, Lord, please turn his counsel to foolishness so that he cannot, advise Absalom well about what to do against me. Now that he's against me, don't let his counsel prevail because he's counseling Absalom against me. And then when he reaches the summit of Mount of Olives, then Hushai comes to him from the city of Ephraim. This is one of his friends, and his coat is torn and he has dirt on his head, so he's showing that he's in mourning for the king. And as soon as David sees him, he says, hey, you're not of any use to me here. I would actually like you to go back to Absalom and pretend to be his advisor, but give opposing advice to him as what Ahithophel is giving him, so that, he won't be able to prevail against me. And so Hushai says, okay, I'll do that. And so he leaves, goes back to Jerusalem, and he arrives at the city at the same time as Absalom. And so he tells Absalom, hey, I would like to advise you as I've always advised your father. And Absalom allows for him to do that. Meanwhile, David leaves the summit of the Mount of Olives, and he is approached by Ziba. Remember, this is Mephibosheth's, the guy that's tending his property, while Mephibosheth, who is Jonathan's son, Jonathan was David's best friend. There's a lot of, referencing of people, so hopefully you remember the story. But Jonathan was David's best friend. He was killed in the battle with Saul, and the only surviving son of his was Mephibosheth. He was crippled in this battle because he was young and the nurse was running away with him. She drops him. He gets crippled. And David eventually brings him into his home when he becomes the king of Israel and puts Ziba in charge of Saul's estate. And so this is the Ziba that is coming to David now. He comes to him with donkeys and with, it says, 200 loaves of bread, hundreds of bunches of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a skin of wine. And he says, this is for your travels. And so David thanks him. And then he says, where is Mephibosheth? And he says, well, he stayed back in Jerusalem because he's hoping that Absalom will give him the kingdom of his grandfather. And so he's staying there, which makes absolutely no sense. But David thinks that that is what is happening. That's what Ziba is telling him. David has been kind to him this entire time, but he thinks that he's betrayed him. And so he gives all of his land to Ziba, Mephibosheth's land. Then David leaves the Mount of Olives and goes to the Benjamite city, and there he is met by a man named Shimei, and he begins cursing David and throwing stones at him. He calls him a worthless, bloodthirsty man, blames him for Saul's death and for stealing the kingdom from him. And Abishai, which is David's nephew, who is always the one that is trying to kill David's enemies. Remember, he's the one that told David he should kill Saul whenever he stumbled upon him in the cave when they were hiding out. He has all the while he killed Abner. He wants to kill David's enemies. And so he tells David, hey, give me permission. I'll go cut that guy's head off right now. And David says, no, I don't want any part of that man's death. He says, how do I know that God doesn't want this? How do I know that this isn't God's will? He said this also to the priests, and we'll read it a little bit more in detail later. But when the priest came to him and he told him, God willing, I will be back to Jerusalem, he said, I don't know what God's will is. If it's God's will to bring me back to Jerusalem, I will get to go there. If it's not, if I don't have favor with him anymore, then I don't. I don't know what to do about that. And here he says, maybe God sent him to curse me. David remembers that Nathan told him that someone from his own house would rise up against him. That was part of his punishment for his affair with Bathsheba and the killing of Uriah. And so David's like, maybe this is what he was talking about, and maybe, it's just a small punishment, and then I'll eventually get to go back to Jerusalem, but maybe not. Maybe it's God's will that Absalom takes the throne. I don't know. And maybe now he sent Shimei to come and curse me because I don't deserve the throne anymore. That's what he says. He says, you're getting what you deserve. You took the throne away from Saul, and now your son's taking it away from you. Good, that's what you deserve. And he's like, maybe he's right. My son is against me. This man is against me. Maybe all of this is in God's will. I have no idea. And then he says to Abishai, he says, my son, who came from my own body, seeks my life. So how much more now may this Benjamite? Let him alone and let him curse me. Maybe this is God's will. So basically what he's saying is, I am way less concerned about someone from Saul's, one of Saul's descendants cursing me than I am one of my own descendants wanting to kill me, right? He's like, it makes sense at least with him, because Saul had been telling everybody the whole time that David was trying to take his kingdom away, and that's why it was okay for him to pursue him. And for someone from his own tribe to believe that would make absolute sense. And so he's like, I get that. Maybe he's even right. I don't know. I'm more concerned about my own descendant, not just cursing me, but trying to kill me and taking my throne. So no, I'm not concerned about this guy. I'm going to go about my business, and I'm going to trust God in this situation. And if God is going to choose which one of us is right. Is Shemaiah right? Is he the one that is completely correct in the fact that I deserve all of this because I took the throne from Saul? Even though, God's the one that gave David the throne. He didn't take it from Saul. He, as a matter of fact, didn't want Saul to die. He kept running away from Saul every time Saul tried to kill him because he didn't want to retaliate. He didn't want it to result in him killing Saul. And then, he didn't kill Saul. The Philistines are the ones that killed Saul. And so he knows all of that, but he also knows that he slept with Bathsheba and then got her husband killed on the front lines of the military, all so he could take his wife. And so he's like, I didn't actually kill Saul and take the throne, but I did kill your Bathsheba's husband and take her as my wife. And then he also knows that he hasn't handled his sons all in, the best way. And so he's like, God's going to choose. God's going to choose between me and Absalom. God's going to choose whether this Benjamite is right or whether I'm right. He's either going to restore me to the throne or he's not going to restore me to the throne. He's going to allow me to die in battle or out here in exile, or he's, not, and I'm just going to be in exile, or I'm going to be restored. He's like, I don't know, and I'm doing nothing. I'm leaving it all in God's hands because I literally do not know what God wants in this situation. And I accept whatever it is because I deserve a lot of things, and I don't know if that's what God chooses to do to me or not. Basically, in God's hand are both mercy and grace, life and death, and He's the one that gets to make these decisions. He has blessings and curses also in his hands. And so this is all up to the Lord. And so after that it says that they continue on their journey. The guy's still throwing rocks at them and cursing them. He has complete restraint. He restrains all of his people and he continues on his way. And it says that he finally, after 21 miles of travel, descending 3,500 feet, he gets to the Jordan River weary and worn.